Hi, I'm Katy Milkman, and I'm a professor at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. And I study the science of behavior change. In fact, I co-direct a research center called the Behavior Change for Good Initiative. Yeah, it's often difficult for people to accept facts that are not aligned with their hopes for what the world looks like. So cognitive dissonance is a term that's been used to describe how hard it is for us to hold two conflicting beliefs in mind at the same time. So you might both want to believe the world I'm living in is a good world and I'm contributing in positive ways and we're heading in a great direction, and find it hard to hold in mind at the same time the belief that the climate is in crisis and we're heading towards absolute emergency. Those two things are misaligned. And so in general, when we face cognitive dissonance, two beliefs that's hard to hold in mind at the same time, we try to figure out a way to resolve it. And that often means people don't actually focus on the crisis. They'll downplay it in their mind in order to satisfy their desire to believe the world is a just place, the world is on a positive trajectory, and so on. And that's a real challenge, because in order to spur action, you need people to accept just how big the threats are that they face.
What would you say are some of the methods or possibilities of getting people to deal with it?
I think we know actually a lot about what motivates changes in beliefs and what scares people and into action. One thing that's really important is whether or not something seems vivid and real to us. So to give you an example, think about shark attacks. Shark attacks are not actually a major threat to humanity. There's something like 10 people killed per year by sharks, and yet we have Shark Week, and people panic at the idea of a shark at the beach. It's a very vivid experience to just imagine being attacked by a shark. And so we overweight the probability of that kind of risk, or of an airplane crash. And so how can we make the crisis that we face with the climate, how can we make the climate emergency as vivid as possible so that people will really appreciate and be frightened by what we're up against? That's one way I think we can think about changing behavior. Another thing that we know about behavior change is that people tend to focus and empathize more with identifiable victims than with statistics. So if you present to someone, for instance, an opportunity to donate to an organization that might help children who don't have enough food, children who are starving, you'll actually do much better if you focus attention on the story of one child who's facing a challenge than all of the children who are facing a challenge. And I think we can use that insight as well in the crisis we face with the climate, because often we talk in numbers and statistics and generalizations about what's coming instead of focusing on individuals whose livelihoods are being affected and their own stories. And so doing more storytelling, connecting this more to individuals, is another way we can make people empathize more and more likely to act.
Why do you think people are attracted to catastrophes, movies, staring at wrecks?
Yeah, these are extremely emotional events, right? If you watch a catastrophic movie, if you focus on a disaster, your emotions are triggered in a really dramatic way. So whenever we are emotionally connected to something, that is a major trigger of action. It's a trigger of conversations with others. It leads us to reach out rather than shutting down, and it leads to more conversation. And so I certainly think it's really important to recognize that we need to use the language of a climate emergency and not climate change in order to capitalize on people's attraction to these catastrophes and focus on these sort of catastrophic situations. Yeah, when we feel overwhelmed by a goal, it feels big and daunting, and can I really take any action that will matter? What research shows is a really important thing to do is to break that big goal down into smaller pieces and think about what actions you can take to have an effect on a component part. So I often study this in contexts less dramatic than climate change, something like trying to achieve a yearly volunteering goal or an exercise goal. And we do much better in those contexts instead of thinking about what I want to accomplish this year, thinking about something much more bite-sized, like instead of 200 hours of volunteering this year, if I focus on 4 hours a week, I actually turn out to volunteer about 10% more over the course of the year because that's bite size. You see the same thing with savings decisions, and you can think about the same kind of tool being useful for climate change. Instead of thinking, how am I going to cut my carbon footprint by this dramatic amount in order to have an impact, you could think about how is it that this week I can cut back by a certain amount. Or you could think about how am I going to make a contribution to volunteering or fundraising for this giant cause. Think about what are the action steps you can take now. And in general, when we make a plan about how we'll act, when we'll act, and where we'll go, for instance, when will I vote? Where will I vote? How will I get there? It leads people to vote more. So thinking about what are the actions you want to take this week, and what are the concrete steps you'll take? When will you do it? Where will you do it? How will you get there in order to affect the kind of change that matters? That kind of bite-sized thinking actually makes it much more palatable for individuals to make a change, because now I can see exactly how small my actions need to be to add up to a bigger outcome.
And just on a personal note, where do you feel we're at the moment? What do you think?
That's a hard question. So first I should say, climate change is not my area of expertise, but obviously as a scientist and a citizen of the world, I care deeply about it, and I'm completely convinced that we need to take much more aggressive action in order to solve this massive problem. I think the actions of individuals are important, not because our individual actions, whether or not you decide to recycle more or whether or not you turn down your thermostat, that's not going to solve the problem. We need collective action. But there's really great research showing that when we ourselves buy in and take small actions in our own lives, we become more motivated towards an overarching goal, more compelled to vote in and to advocate for the bigger changes that are needed, the changes in laws and the changes that organizations will have to make that can really, really shift things. So my view is that I hope individuals will take small actions in their lives, and that will catapult towards voting in ways and supporting leaders who can make the massive change that we all need to get through this.